I can almost hear those church bells ringing. Welcome to Pescara. Well, it's actually a small town about 6 miles up the road, Spolatore. These fantastic roads and vista used to be a racing course, home to the famous Coppa Acerbo, a Grand Prix race for many, many years. And actually, for just one of those years, it was a full points-paying Formula 1 Grand Prix, a quite significant one at that, because this circuit, Pescara, holds the honor at being the longest circuit to ever hold a Formula 1 Grand Prix, and it almost didn't happen. It's quite an interesting story. The race at Pescara in 1957 was really a throwback, even then. It was a callback to how racing was. The scope, the scale, it was the distance. Traveling was a defining feature of motor racing from the beginning. To go from here to there and to be the fastest one doing it, that was the goal. As the first motor races appeared in the late 19th century and on into the 20th, the common achievement was to simply get there first. Therefore, you are the winner. When circuit racing began, many took after their pure road racing counterparts, simply a series of roads stitched together in a loop. In many ways, the longer the better, for it was the act of going, traveling a great distance at relatively high speed, which thrilled. Racing was full of these types of events, from the streets of Brno in the Czech Republic to flying with 2 wheels around the mountain course on the Isle of Man, tackling Sicily quite literally in Vincenzo Florio's famous Targa, and perhaps the greatest of them all, right here in Italy, 1,000 miles from Brescia to Rome and back, the Mille Miglia. These days, distance, at least in going somewhere, is really a thing of the past. The Nürburgring Nordschleife is a relic of that time. One of the last remaining examples of what it feels like to truly travel while motor racing. It's no wonder it's still so popular. And while some modern courses like the reinvented Spa-Francorchamps or Wisconsin's Road America are truly fantastic courses, the spirit of real long road races and a way they held them in the early 20th century is all but faded. And so when Pescara was first drawn out in the 1920s, a circuit of this nature was almost commonplace. A circuit was simply needed to host a race in the area, so it was stitched together out of local roads and a race course was born. The race to be, named after a local and unsavory politician, was known as the Coppa Acerbo, and in its very first running, in 1924, it was none other than some local racing driver known as Enzo Ferrari who came out on top. But it was recognized early on that this circuit had a little something special over the average. Starting out in central Pescara in the city itself on the Viale Giovanni Bovio, the loop begins with a fairly standard series of bends for a street circuit. But working its way to the southeast, just before the Villa Raspa, the path deviates north towards the hills, and that's where the fun begins. Over the narrow, twisty, and it must be noted, extremely bumpy roads, the course twists and winds, gaining altitude as it goes past the village of Montari, all the way up to the town of Spolatore, at 600 feet above sea level. From there, it's a magnificent run along the ridges, descending slightly to pass by Fornace, and a series of switchback hairpins before arriving at the picturesque mountain town of Capelle sul Talvo. From the town, it's a short blast down the remainder of the hills and back to sea level to begin the signature feature of the course, an all-out 4-mile or 6.4-kilometer run to the coast on a straight section of highway towards the town of Monte Silvano. Because speed was the highlight, on this high-speed dash, a single kilometer was marked to be timed and tracked the car's top speeds. Known as the flying kilometer in its later years, cars would be clocked at nearly 200 miles per hour without a barrier in sight. And as the town of Monte Silvano appeared ahead, a hard-braking and 90-degree turn sends the cars headed back firmly towards Pescara on the Via Adriatica, another stretch of unrestricted speeds. In the early years, they ran flat out past the start-finish, but for 1934, a chicane was added to slow the cars. Perhaps the only safety-related concession made. In total, the Pescara course was 16 miles or 25 kilometers, but due to its 8+ miles of straights, speeds were fast, and laps would quickly break into the 10-minute mark. It was a fabulous course and featured a little bit of everything, from city to mountains to an all-out drag race. So quickly, the Coppa Acerbo became a yearly event. Racing continued all throughout the interwar years, with Mercedes dueling with Auto Union and local favorite Alfa Romeo. Nuvolari, Caracciola, Rosemeyer, Farsi, they all raced here. And when the war came and then went, the racing luckily came back. Now known simply as the Pescara Grand Prix and featuring a varying list of entries, settling into a sports car event by the 1950s. And that takes us to 1957, when the Coppa Acerbo felt firmly like a fading relic of the past. A very bizarre thing happened. As a global conflict broke out in 1956 and into 1957, the Formula One calendar was in turmoil. In a short span, the Dutch, Belgian, and Spanish Grand Prix were all cancelled. In a last-ditch effort, organizers searched for a race to fit the now month-long gap between the German and Italian Grand Prix at Monza. Struggling for options in an unprecedented move, 2 Grand Prix were scheduled to be in the same country back-to-back. Shockingly, the Pescara Grand Prix was back. A throwback and revival even in its own day, the Grand Prix fraternity was skeptical in its return. The entry list soon followed, made of 16 cars, 10 of which were Maseratis, 4 for the works team, Fangio, Bera, Shell, Scarlatti, and a myriad of private entrants in the well-proven 250F. To combat them, Vanwall entered 3 cars for Moss, Lewis Evans, and Brooks. And Cooper fielded 2 of their bizarre rear-engined F2 machines for Brabham and Salvadori. But those not on the entry docket were perhaps the biggest story of them all. Having already pulled his team several times earlier in the season due to safety concerns, inaugural winner Enzo Ferrari said Pescara was simply too dangerous and refused to officially enter his cars. Perhaps he was reliving a memory of losing the fantastic racing driver Guy Moll in a mysterious accident at the course in 1934. But more likely, it was De Portago's infamous crash in that year's Mille Miglia just a few short months earlier, which was the final say. It's a miracle the race at Pescara would be staged to begin with, passing over some of the very same roads used in that 1,000-mile test. But Italian driver Luigi Musso, then second in points, was eager to take the fight to Fangio. He argued with Enzo until begrudgingly he allowed Musso to enter the car, but the Ferrari name would be nowhere near it. And so the now rebranded Syracuse Lancia for Musso rounded out the field. So on the weekend of August 17th and 18th, 1957, real Italian road racing was once again revived in the Grand Prix World Championship. The race came together quickly and had limited preparations. Practice and qualifying were all done on the Saturday, the day before the race. But in a time where these proceedings were usually stretched out for a week or more, the whole affair felt rushed. The officials quickly closing the public roads and allowing the Grand Prix cars to go out just on one day, once in the morning and once in the evening. The 2 practice qualifying sessions were a spectacular show between the Works Maseratis and Vanwalls, with Fangio and Moss swapping fast times several times. But at the end of the evening session, it was Fangio with a 9-minute and 44-second lap who would come out with the pole for Sunday's race. On race day, the cars were rolled to the grid in the morning, with the event set to start early to avoid the late-day heat. Unable to properly ticket or keep people from the massive circuit, spectators piled in for the free event. And at 9:30 a.m. local, the flag was dropped for the 18-lap Grand Prix. Musso's pseudo-Ferrari took the lead from the start, but was shortly overtaken by Moss in his Vanwall, seen pushing the roads to the limit, unlike he'd been able to do in practice. By lap 9, Moss was breaking even the pole lap speed and stretching out his lead. Musso's Ferrari then gave up the ghost and Fangio slipped into second. But without the cornering speed to catch Moss, Fangio was simply unable to challenge. And despite some braking issues in the late running, Sterling was able to claim the victory some 3 minutes ahead of the Argentinian. and prove his win earlier in that season at the British Grand Prix was not a fluke. And in true throwback to the early days, only 7 of the 16 starters finished the Grand Prix. The brutality of the circuit had left its mark. It was a fantastic and most importantly safe return to pure Grand Prix road racing. But as quickly as it was announced and organized, it was over. And when the 1958 calendar was revealed with the Dutch and Belgian Grand Prix having returned, Pescara was of course not on the schedule. The brief revival of road racing, again, was a part of history. The Pescara Grand Prix was run as an open race for a few additional years, with the World Sports Car Endurance event being the last to ever run the circuit in 1961. Although the roads are still intact, the Pescara Grand Prix has fully faded into history. Maybe it was always destined for this fate, but for a brief moment in 1957, the true glory days of unrestricted Grand Prix racing through the countryside returned. But now we can experience and relive this great course in sim thanks to Italo Tracks. Known for their wonderful rendition of the lesser-known Italian road circuit Napoli, Pescara was released a few months back to fill a gap and recreate this wonderful circuit in detail like never before. Based on GPS, LiDAR, and photogrammetry data of the area and surviving roads, photographs, video, and descriptions of how they were, Italo Tracks has successfully modeled the circuit as it was for that 1957 revival. This rendition of Pescara truly transports you and brings to life the feeling of this epic race in one of the most beautiful locations in the world. One lap around and it's easy to see the care and detail put into the many custom objects and detailed road. We're looking at it today in Assetto Corsa, but amazingly, Italo Tracks has not only released this for AC, but simultaneously also for R Factor 2 and Automobilista 1, allowing all of those who enjoy vintage sim racing to experience this track in the sim of their choice. And to experience the track, I thought it to be no more appropriate than to take out Stirling Moss's race-winning Vanwall VW5. Seen here in its 1958 spec, this wonderful rendition of the late 50s Grand Prix staple was released by Perendinator back in October of this year alongside a couple other 50s competitors, the Cooper T43 and BRM Type 25. When paired with Kuno's official release of the Maserati 250F and its wonderful historic skin pack from Malarkey, it really can create quite a complete grid to simulate that 1957 race. So let's jump in for 2 laps around the formidable Pescara aboard the Vanwall VW5 to experience a little bit of that road racing glory. Alright, so here we are on the grid in downtown Pescara, the Giovanni Bovio. Lights are lit. Out, we're underway. Bit of wheel spin off the line, but a great launch there. The car is geared ultra long though, so we'll bog down as we get up the gears. We need the speed though for the end of the lap. Looks like everybody was able to get off the line. I think I'm side by side with Joe Bonnier here. He's gonna have a bit of more power than me in that Maserati. Let's get it down a couple of gears. You can see the trains in front in Central Station. Everybody checks up. It's quite wide here. It's maybe one of the widest spots on the whole course and maybe the best place to pass because of that. But now come up to the School of Technology, a 90-degree to the left. So we'll turn on to the Enzo Ferrari Street, I think named in later years just to help you remember what used to be here. So come down to Enzo Ferrari, off of Enzo Ferrari up to another 90-degree to the right. Whoa, a bit of contact maybe there in front from the leaders. Looks like Moss has gotten out to the lead. So we're able to make the pass on Bonnier there. And now wind our way. This is one of my favorite sections of the first part of this course. As we exit the city, we're headed towards the Villa Raspa right now. We'll get it up into 4th gear. It's very fast through here. And quite an interesting line. You gotta be careful with this one. We'll get it down to 3rd gears. We'll have a quick flick to the right, left. There we go, back into 4th for just a moment. We'll get it back down to 3rd. This corner, it's just very tight through here, so you gotta be careful. Because we'll see the Villa Raspa right in front, but we'll turn off just before we get there. Makes some contact with Harry Shell as well. All right, join in the fun. But now we're headed up into the hills, and you can tell instantly the road gets a lot more narrow and very bumpy, and it's only going to get much more like that from here. So come up to the Montani corner. This one's deceptively tight, down a couple of gears. So float it on through, see if we can make a run on Shell here, because the road's going to become unpassable as we get a bit further. That Maserati's just got a little bit more power than the Vanwall does, though. It's the road very narrow there, right to the outside. So we'll chase it over the ridge. Almost went off. Come into a very cambered corner. You can use some of that to our advantage, but see how narrow the road is through here. It's barely one car wide. Never mind trying to pass somebody or something. Two in front, check up a bit. So we look to the right and to the left. But it's almost hard enough just to keep the car on the road as it bounces over all these bumps. We come up to the Valle Carbone. It's a little section here, very, very tight. Technical down to first gear. You can see Spolatore in the distance there. We'll be headed in just a second. Well, Fangio runs a bit wide in front of Shell here. All right, through the technical section here, try to get alongside on the exit, but Shell is just able to keep me behind. I'm definitely a lot faster. All right, we'll head though. We got a few switchbacks coming up. The first one is very tight on the entry. We'll get it down to second gear. We do have a barrier on the left side here though, one of the few on the circuit to help us not roll down the mountain. We could use a few more of those as we'll come up to another switchback. This one, deceptive as well. It's tighter than it looks on the entry. We'll use some of these concrete patches to help get us around. And the final one here, you'll see Spolatore right in front. We'll come up to the hairpin, which marks our entrance to the city. Get it down to first gear. There's not going to be a lot of room to pass here as we got sidewalks again. And the curbing is just so severe, the black and white checkerboard, that you don't want to touch it at all. You can see how high it is. So we'll come to Spolatore, very picturesque town, down to first gear, through the right-hander, through the city. Try side by side as now we'll head downhill. It's going to pick up quite a lot of speed as we exit Spolatore itself. Oh, Shell runs a bit wide there. Not necessarily a great place to make a move. This corner, decreasing radius, can be very tricky. Easy to end up in that wall on the right side. Back to a little bit of a ridge running. This is where you start to get, or I start to get that impression of just how beautiful this area is and picturesque this track would be, as I'll lose the pack in front just a little bit, but honestly, you're not going to be able to pass through here anyway. So come up to Fornace, down to second gear. It's another one of those late apexes. Let the car stay to the right side till the last minute and then curve it in. But it really gives you an appreciation for the Abruzzi Mountain region, and this whole area is just so nice. Really feels like proper motor racing. As we'll come through now up to the Santa Maria hairpin. This is always quite tricky. We've got some spectators down the left there, down to first gear. It would be quite easy through. Oh, Shell in front. We'll take advantage of that right away. All right, picking up one spot there, now in fourth, I think. So come around the ridge, and you can see Capelle in front of us. Fangio locks him up there. His Assetto Corsa counterpart, maybe not quite as talented as Fangio truly was. We'll come into Capelle itself, and this is another area you're just not going to be able to pass here. The car has a wild wiggle on the entry. It's still very bumpy through here. We'll come down to a very, very tight section. So two in front, to make contact. We'll slide up the inside of Fangio there. And now we just have our teammate Mas to worry about. So exit under the bridge. That's a quick run down the hill here as we'll head towards the highway. We're not quite there yet. Get it into second for this ridge. It's easy to overdo it on some of these bends. There's a lot of bumps, and if you hit them just slightly differently than you're used to, they can absolutely launch the car off. But there we go, through the switchback and onto the first of the two long straights, and we can finally rest a little bit, although it is still bumpy down here, so you have to be on top of it. We'll get it up to fourth gear though, and see if we can slipstream Moss in front. So there we go, we'll be able to easily make a pass on him, rocket up the inside, and look for the signs for the flying kilometer. This is where the cars would reach their highest speed, so come up to a little kink in the road, very, very minor. Past the Villa Carmi train station, I believe. And there I can see just ahead the flying kilometer, the start of it anyway. The banner marks the start, and you'd have somebody, I suppose, with a watch timing the car. As we finish the kilometer there, now we can see Monte Silvano in front of us. We'll watch for the braking. This one you have to be ultra careful for. The first barrel marks it. We'll jump on just past it between the first and the second one. Use engine braking to help slow the car down in second gear. It's always tricky once you're going that fast to get the car slowed down, but we'll handle it through the very bumpy roads. This car just doesn't like to slide as much as that Maserati 250 does, and it took every bit of my power to not want to drive that Maserati 250, because it is one of my favorite cars in all of sim racing. But it's really interesting to experience the Vanwall a little bit and read back the accounts of this race, because this car handles like they describe it handling. It's very bouncy over the bumps, much like they describe it, or Moss describes it through the qualifying sessions. And they figured out something for the race, because it seemed like he didn't have that issue anymore. But I've just found you cannot slide this car nearly as much as that Maserati. And maybe not as pleasurable on surface value to drive, but once you get it, it is a fun little car in its own right. We're rocketing towards the end of the lap here, back into Pescara. I can see in my mirrors just ever so slightly. I think it's Fangio behind me. And we'll come into the chicane, which was added in the 1930s. Brake maybe a little bit early for it, but you definitely don't want to overdo the braking on these. Right, all the way down to first gear for this one. Oh, even then, running a bit long, kick the rear end around. Come around the other side of it. I looked on Google Earth to see if these roads are still here, and it's 100% of the roads around this course. They may be changed a bit here and there, but they're all still here, and it must be so wild to live on one of these streets knowing that there used to be a race through your neighborhood. We'll come across the line and complete the first lap, pretty easily able to get into the lead. It's kind of par for the course with Assetto Corsa's AI, but that's one of the amazing things with Italo Tracks releasing this for multiple sims, is you can enjoy it in different sims. And I have no doubt the AI is probably a bit better in R Factor 2 and AMS 1. We'll come down to the train station here. Do a little bit of drifting there, but it is very easy to overdo it and spin out. I'll try my best here to put in a solid lap. I've had so much pleasure learning, both driving this course as well as just learning about it. And I didn't realize really that this was such a return to the classic road racing that Grand Prix used to be, pre-war, pre-World War II, or in that interwar period and before. Down at first as we come off Enzo Ferrari's street. You see the old pictures in the films, and I guess now that I've realized this, it's not such a surprising thing, but really by the 1950s, all of the courses that they were racing at were more or less these permanent courses. Of course, you still had Spa and things like that, but not quite like it was even 20 years before. So we'll fly through that very, very nice section here. We come to Villa Raspa again, down a couple of gears. Head up into the hills again. But But the way, specifically in the Motorsport magazine article about this race, which was written contemporarily at the time that this race happened, they just talk about it in such interest in how this was really a callback to the old days. And it's tough to imagine these days this not being the old days, the 1950s, but they're thinking about a time before that. But it's always relative to when you're alive and what you're experiencing. So we'll come over the top of the hill. This section, probably the trickiest on the whole course, just to make sure you don't run off the track, especially in this car. Always working at the wheel. I'm not sawing at the wheel for no reason. It's just bouncing all over the place. This track is very bumpy, and this car doesn't handle it as well as the Maserati does, but true to life, as it seems. Right, down to third gear here for the switchback. Going to the Villa Carbone, I believe it is. Whoa, right to the outside there. Almost dipped a wheel off. If you dip a wheel off, you're going to be gone. So I love the look at Spolatore there. So we'll hustle it through these switchbacks. As the road's going to widen up just a little bit here, so it becomes slightly easier. It almost reminds you of a rally stage at various points. And I thought about talking about rally in the introduction, because there's still, I think rally is probably the closest that you can get to that natural road type racing, but it's not the same as a head-to-head race on those types of conditions. I think motor racing simply doesn't have that anymore, and the Nürburgring, we'll see the Spolatore hairpin in front. The Nürburgring really is the last remaining thing that's somewhat like that, that's out there, that's not a classic type revival race or a vintage meet of some kind. So coming to Spolatore. So come across in front of the church there. I love these little villages. They say some of the Mille Miglia took place on these actual same roads. I don't know exactly which ones that it would have been on, or if that even was every year. It might have changed a little bit year to year. But if you wanted to, I think it's a dream of many to recreate the Mille Miglia in a sim. And maybe someday, with all the stuff happening out there these days, never say never. But this will give you a great feel for that, and something you can have now as a baby around this right-hander. There we go. Doesn't close in too much, but it's quite easy to just run slightly too wide. So we'll head towards Fornace again. Down to second gear. I found the brakes in this Vanwall are a bit better than the Maserati. That's probably where it has it. And in a straight line, head-to-head, the Vanwall actually does quite well once it gets up to speed. The bodywork on it was an interesting design. It's a weird looking car, I think, especially if you're not familiar with it. It's not what you would think of as a Grand Prix car from this time period. So we'll come into the hairpins. This is the Maria hairpin down to first gear. Personally, I think of that Maserati 250F as the quintessential 50s Grand Prix car. It's the one I like the most. Looks right, and this one's always a strange looker, but it was all about the aerodynamics. Vanwall, very short-lived entry into Formula One, as we got Capelle in front of us here. Put it down to second on entry just for safety, so we certainly don't want to run into any of these buildings. Big correction there. I'm down to the first of the hairpins. It was chaos through here last time, so it'll be a little nicer running through on my own. So just let it roll through. There's not a lot you can do with this car. You can't quite kick it around the same way as you can the Maserati. So now we'll exit Capelle and head down towards the highways again. Just the switchback in front, down to second gear. Might be able to really slide it through here if you're pushing. All right, let it ring out, get it up the gears again. But Vanwall, this was really their second car that they made, and last for Grand Prix racing. The second that they entered in a lot of races, the Vanwall 5. And it featured an engine, I believe, based on a Norton motorbike engine, but a four-cylinder, just a four-cylinder in this car, and was able to win the Constructors' Championship, but not the Drivers' Championship. That went to Ferrari in 1958, and 57 was really the coming out of Vanwall and being a competitive make. I think before then, they were seen as a little gimmicky. The British, believe it or not, just hadn't established themselves in the Grand Prix racing world. As being thrown about as we get into the flying kilometer here. But the British were still yet to be proven in Grand Prix racing. BRM was not competitive at this point, and Vanwall finally in 1957 has this breakthrough with this car, the aerodynamic body, helping it on the fast courses like here at Pescara. So we'll come and break down for Montezavano. And point it back towards Pescara here. But this is a track that always interested me because it is the longest circuit in Formula One history, and so naturally it comes up and you look at maps of it, and from the zoomed out distance that you have to view the map on, the Dorito shaped track with the two long sections and then a squiggly bit on the bottom, it just really does not do it justice as to what this track was like. And I think this type of straight running like this is an interesting contrast. This track has a little bit of everything. It's got that city section at the front. It's got this long, fast straights at the back end. And then in the middle is one of the most glorious mountain sections on any course that you've ever seen. And it really is a special track. I think it's an amazing circuit. Formula cars, but especially would be awesome with sports cars and doing some kind of endurance races around here. I think anytime you have a track that has these different types of sections and is as long as this, it's quite nice to do for events like that. And I could imagine with it being available for all these different sims, so we'll do hard brakes here up to the chicane towards the end of the lap. It's quite large for a chicane. It's almost run deep there again. Whoa, swing that rear end around. We'll hustle it through the final few corners here. I think this one will be quite popular with some of the historic racing enthusiasts. All right, come down to first gear through the final turn. Just don't clip the wall, the building on the inside. Come around to win our little race here. We got one car stranded in the pits, one of the little Coopers. Did not fare very well in real life, and not in our little make-believe race here. It looks like Jean Berra is actually going to be in second behind us somewhere through all the craziness back there. But Pescara, what a wonderful track. It's been a pleasure to learn, like I said, over the past couple of weeks and really past couple of months really at this point. But learn all about it and its history and how it was truly this revival event in the 1950s, a time where we look back these days at those being the old days. But they had old days then too, and this was a revival of some of that for them. So I hope you enjoyed this. Go check it out on Italo Tracks. You can absolutely tell it was made with passion, and it's something that I hope many, many people enjoy. But until next time, this is GP Laps, and I'll see y'all again later.